Today we'll be drawing an orange and an apple using oil pastels. We'll be using these Crayola brand oil pastels, as well as a choice of paper. There are different kinds of paper that you can use with oil pastels, including tinted color paper like this kind, or this piece is something that was just donated to me. It's a colored cardstock, or just white paper. I'm going to use the colored cardstock, beginning with a yellow oil pastel, and I am observing the orange, the shape of it, and even though it's a bit of a round shape, I do notice it's not a perfect circle, so I'm trying to just mimic the shape of that orange onto my paper, and being very careful to not make it a perfect circle, because sometimes if it's a perfect circle, it won't look really realistic. It's going to look more like a cartoon. And then we're adding the details in the orange where the stem is and the creases. Okay, now we want to add our apple, so I'm making a few marks just to help me sort of measure where the apple is in relation to the orange, and then drawing out the shape of the apple, which is also a rounder shape similar to the orange, but from what I'm looking at, my apple is a little bit smaller. If you are working from life, from observation, remember your fruits are going to be a little bit different, so you want to look at the actual fruit and draw what you see. And then we're going to add the stem, the little indent where the stem comes out for the apple. While we have the yellow oil pastel in hand, we can start coloring in the orange as well as the apple. And we're looking at where the lightest part of the orange is and using that yellow to lay in some color. You'll notice that I'm holding it a little bit on the side, and that's allowing me to fill in a bigger area a little bit faster than using the tip. So depending on how you hold your oil pastel, you're going to be able to work faster or slower in your application of color. And then do the same thing with the apple. Wherever you see that there might be some yellow on your apple, some apples might be red and yellow, some might not. And now I am using the yellow orange oil pastel, working from lighter to darker color selections and just reworking some of the orange, adding a layer on top of the yellow to just give some really deep richness to the color. And it blends the oil pastel underneath as this is being added on top. The two colors blend together to give you some unique tones. Now, even though the apple is not really orange, there are some areas that are a little bit lighter, and I'm using this yellow-orange oil pastel in those areas so that when I go back in with darker colors, I'll have that built up. Next, we're switching to a regular orange, and this is pretty much the local color for the orange, or local color also means the color you associate with the object. And so this is going to be most of the orange is going to have this color in it. And I'm paying attention a little bit to some of the darker shadow areas now and being selective on where I'm applying this color and where I'm leaving the lighter color showing through. And now I'm switching back to the yellow orange, and I'm using that to help me blend the color so that it looks a little bit more natural. So I'm layering that now on top of the orange that I applied and blending it into the color that was previously on there, which was the yellow orange and the yellow, to give it a really uniform finish. And now we're going to introduce some brown for the stem area, and also to get a little bit of a deeper or darker shadow area. So where the light's not hitting the orange, we're going to use some of that brown just to give this more of a dimensionality, a three-dimensionality to it. Now we want to really build up that shadow, and believe it or not, we're going to be using blue. So even though an orange isn't actually blue, shadow areas on an orange object typically do have some blue tone to them because blue is the opposite of orange on the color wheel. So we're using our blue oil pastel, and this is the lighter blue that I had available in the package. I believe it's cerulean blue, and we're going to build up some of those shadow areas with even more darkness, even more depth. And now we're going back to the orange and using that to blend in on top of that blue, just to incorporate it more into the orange so it doesn't look like it's just sitting on top of the surface. And this is going to make it look a little less shocking and a little more natural to the way things might look in real life. Just as we've been doing, we're layering these colors. So now I'm back to using the yellow orange and just blending some more, layering and blending, and then into the yellow, same thing. And you're just doing this until it looks right to you. And when you're comparing it to the real life orange, you're just checking to see if this is what you think it should be. And then to finish off our orange, we want to really pull out those highlights where the light is hitting, and white is great for that. It sits right on the surface. It doesn't blend too much into the previous oil pastel layers. It can if you move it around a little, but it also has the ability to really sit on top. Now, oil pastel can get little crumbly pieces that accumulate on the paper, and rather than using your fingers, which could smear your work, using a paintbrush that you don't care too much about and just kind of using that to brush the pieces off of the paper is a good idea. It keeps your work from smudging. It also keeps your hands from getting too dirty from the oil pastel. As we start on our apple, we're using a red-orange or orange-red oil pastel, and we're working on the lighter areas of the apple where it's not as deep of a red color. Again, this is going to be unique to whatever apple you're looking at. So obviously if you're drawing a green apple, you're not going to be using these colors. But if you are using the same type of apple that has similar markings, then this is a good one to use as your color that you start with. And now we're switching to a regular red, and you can see there's definitely a difference in the deepness of the red versus the red-orange that we just used. And we're now building up some layers here so that it has that richness and depth to it, just like the orange. And we're working in, especially where we see darker colors, just layering and blending and layering and blending, always looking back at the apple that we are drawing from to make sure we are representing it as close to life as possible. And I'm going in with regular orange this time and just using that to help me blend the layers together. And you can definitely see that it is bringing in a brighter, lighter tone to the part of the apple where there's more light hitting it. This isn't going to go over the whole apple, but definitely where I see some lighter spots. And now I'm back into the red-orange, just layering and blending these colors until I get a good representation of what I see on the apple skin. Now I'm going back in with the yellow and just giving some attention to those lighter parts of the apple that I haven't really looked at for a little bit, and kind of building up some layers in there where the apple has some yellow and greenish spots, just to make it look as finished as the rest of the color on the apple. Picking up the red again, I'm just working light to dark, dark to light, just pushing those values and reworking, and the orange, just continuing to do that, always looking back at the apple to make sure I'm getting as close to a realistic representation as I can. Every apple is going to be different. Every time I make an apple is going to be different. The same is going to go for when you're drawing apples. And now we're really looking at shadows. So the same way that blue on the orange was the opposite on the color wheel. For red, the opposite is green. So any part of this apple where I see more shadow, like where the stem is going into the apple, the stem itself, even some of the areas where the apple itself has some green on it, I'm going to add some green oil pastel. And for this one, there's even a cast shadow from the orange onto the apple. So the green is going to go around pretty much the whole entire apple because there is some shadow on almost every area or some darker area when I'm looking at it, when I'm observing it. So I want to add that in and then blend it by layering it with some red. So that way it doesn't look as shocking. The same technique we used on the orange, but instead of doing blue and orange, we're doing green and red. And now I'm bringing the light green back in because I did notice that a few of the areas of my apple where there was green that was naturally part of the apple's coloring has sort of gotten blended away and overworked. So I'm just bringing that back in and then adding that lighter green anywhere that I think it's going to help with the dimension on my apple. Even in some of the red areas where if I look closely at the apple, I can see sort of some green peeking through. And then same thing, like some little markings just to give it that realism. And now I'm using some brown to really bring out the stem area because the red and green on its own didn't seem to be enough, and even around the bottom edge. And there's a lot of little oil pastel dust on here, so getting that cleaned out as easily as I can, just really quickly brushing it out of the way. And now I'm going to use the bottom of that same paintbrush to scratch in like a graffito effect into that apple to bring out where I see some thin lines of color. And what this is going to do is pull away the top layers of color and bring through the bottom layers. Just like we did on the orange, we are going to use this white oil pastel to really pull out those highlights, those areas on the apple where the light is reflecting and shining, and anywhere that we want to call attention to that to give this a little bit more realism, a little bit more dimension. To really make this look realistic, we're going to add in the shadow that is falling under the orange and under the apple. And I'm starting with this red-orange oil pastel, just kind of having the shadow connect right under the orange. It's a little bit darker closer to the orange and it gets lighter further away. I have two lights shining on my setup here, so there's a little bit of a double shadow. And then for the apple, we're going in with that light green, that yellow green, and dropping in some shadow underneath the apple there as well. And now we're using some of our color theory, so that blue on top of the orange, and that's what's going to give us that blended color together to give the impression of a shadow. And this isn't going to be like a super realistic representation of a shadow because you really can't get too accurate with the limited color selection that we have for today, but it's going to be close enough to give you the impression of a shadow and really finish off your drawing. So now let's just make a list of all of the colors that we used in this drawing just to have as a reference. Obviously, you don't want to write this out on a finished drawing that you're going to display, but if this is just an exercise, it's a good idea to write down what colors you used so that you know what to do in the future.